Ethan never thought his small transport shuttle would be remembered by history. He had been traveling through a distant star system, carrying simple supplies from one colony to another, when everything changed. A distress signal had appeared, on his radar flashing in red, filling his cockpit with urgent beeps. He hesitated only for a moment before switching his ship toward the signal. What he found was chaos. A massive alien cargo vessel, far larger than his shuttle, had been caught in the gravity pull of a broken moon. Shards of rock crashed into the hull, fires burned across the ship's side, and panicked voices filled the comms. Without thinking, Ethan dove in, using every bit of skill he had learned as a pilot. His little ship darted between falling debris, pushing energy pulses into key sections of the alien vessel to knock it free from the moon's pull. By some miracle, his desperate actions worked. The cargo ship slowly steadied, no longer spinning, out of control. When the alien vessel finally regained power, Ethan expected nothing. Maybe a quick thanks, maybe nothing at all. But instead, his name was demanded. The voices on the comms repeated his ID over and over, and then ordered him to dock. Hesitant, but with no choice, Ethan brought his shuttle alongside the massive ship. What he did not know was that the vessel belonged to the royal family of the Varian Empire, one of the most powerful alien dynasties in the galaxy. When Ethan was escorted into the royal palace days later, his heart pounded. He had only seen such grand halls in vids. The palace ceilings stretched so high they disappeared into glittering, crystal light. The walls were decorated with banners of deep purple and silver, shimmering with alien symbols. Armored guards lined the room, their spears taller than Ethan himself. And at the far end, upon a throne of dark stone and gold, sat the king and queen of the Varians. The queen was graceful, her eyes sharp and calm, her long silver hair woven into delicate braids. The king, however, looked nothing like her. He was broad, with dark green skin and ridges running across his jaw. His eyes burned with suspicion as they followed Ethan's every step. The herald announced, "The human who saved the royal vessel." Ethan swallowed hard. He wore only his patched flight suit, the same one stained with burn marks from the rescue. He felt small and out of place in the enormous hall surrounded by beings twice his size. He bowed slightly, unsure if it was the right thing to do. "You saved our cargo." The queen spoke first. Her voice was soft but carried authority. "Inside that vessel were supplies needed for 3 of our colonies. You risked your life for those not of your kind." I couldn't just ignore the signal," Ethan answered honestly. "Any pilot would have done the same." The king let out a low growl that sounded almost like thunder. "Do not lie, human. Most of your kind would have fled. You acted strangely, perhaps too strangely." Ethan kept his mouth shut. He had already noticed the king's tone was less about gratitude and more about suspicion. It was then that a small voice echoed in the chamber. "Daddy!" The word cut through the silence like a blade. Ethan froze. Slowly, he turned his head to the side. Standing near the queen's throne was a small girl, no older than 8 by human guess. She had delicate features, her skin a pale blue with glowing eyes of silver. She wore a crown too large for her head, and her dress shimmered with golden threads. She was staring directly at Ethan, pointing at him with both hands, her face bright with excitement. The room went dead silent. The guards shifted uncomfortably. The queen's eyes widened slightly. The king's jaw dropped open, then clenched so tight that the ridges along his face bulged. Every noble in the chamber whispered at once, their voices a storm of shock. Ethan blinked, utterly confused. "I think there's been a mistake," but the little girl ran closer, her small shoes clicking against the floor. "Daddy!" she cried again, smiling wide. "You came back for me." Ethan's stomach sank. He looked around, desperate for help. He had never seen this child in his life, yet her words carried innocence and absolute belief. The king slammed, his fist against the arm of his throne, the sound booming like a cannon. "What did you just call him?" His voice shook the walls. The princess froze for a second, but then stubbornly lifted her chin. "I called him Daddy, because he saved me and he feels like home, he feels safe." The court gasped. Some nobles laughed nervously, others whispered in horror. For a Varian princess to call a human, an outsider, her father figure, it was unthinkable. Ethan's face turned pale. He quickly raised his hands. "Your Majesty, I swear I have no idea." "Silence," the king roared. His face turned crimson, his eyes blazing with fury. He stood towering over everyone. "You dare step into my hall, dressed in rags, and now my own blood calls you by that cursed word?" The queen placed a hand on her husband's arm, her calm voice slicing through the storm. "Husband, do not let anger blind you. The child meant no harm. She is young." But the king's rage did not cool. He pointed a trembling finger at Ethan. "This human will explain himself. And he will explain now." Ethan's mind raced. There was no explanation. He could only tell the truth. "I didn't do anything. I saved your ship, that's all. I never met her before." The princess tugged at her father's robe. "But it's true, he's Daddy. He protected me when no one else could. I felt it." The king's chest heaved, his nostrils flared. He looked ready to strike someone down. But then he saw the queen's expression. She wasn't angry. She was watching the human with interest. Almost curiosity. The queen's voice was calm but sharp. "Perhaps the child sees something we do not. Perhaps this human is more than he appears." The king turned to her, his face twisted with disbelief. "You would dare defend this insect?" The queen simply raised her brow. "I defend the truth of what we all witnessed. He saved us. And now our daughter calls him Daddy. We cannot ignore either fact." The hall filled again with whispers. Some nobles smirked, others looked horrified. Ethan stood there, his heart pounding, wishing he could vanish. The princess still clung to his arm, smiling like she had found her hero. The king's face darkened further, a storm gathering behind his eyes. His pride had been wounded in front of his people, his authority challenged by his own daughter's innocent words. And Ethan, standing in the middle of the alien court, realized something terrible. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of something much larger. The silence in the royal hall stretched long after the princess's words. Every noble waited for the king's next command, but his hand shook on the armrest of his throne. His pride had been struck in front of everyone, and yet he could not simply punish the princess. She was his only child, heir to the throne, beloved by the people. Ethan stood awkwardly, the little girl still gripping his arm as though she feared he would vanish if she let go. He wanted to speak, to explain again that this was a mistake, but he sensed that every word could make things worse. Finally, the queen rose gracefully from her throne. Her eyes scanned the nobles, silencing them with a simple glance. "The court is dismissed. My husband and I will speak with the human privately." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, whispering as they left. Ethan caught fragments of words. Shameful, strange, prophecy, and even laughter. Some nobles looked at him with disgust, others with curiosity, but none dared speak openly before the queen. When the hall was finally empty, only the family, a few trusted guards, and Ethan remained. The king leaned forward, his voice like fire. "Explain this madness. Why would she call you that cursed name?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Your Majesty, I swear, I have never met her before today. I don't know why she said it. I didn't trick her. I didn't encourage her. She just decided on her own." The princess spoke up boldly, crossing her arms. "I don't need a reason. I felt it. He's Daddy. That's the truth." The king slammed his fist on the throne again, but the queen touched his arm, stopping him. "Husband, let the child speak. Tell us, my daughter. Why do you feel this way?" The princess looked up at her mother with wide silver eyes. "When our ship was in danger, I was scared. I thought we would all die. But then I felt something. It was warm and safe, like arms around me. I looked at the stars and I knew someone was coming. Then the alarm stopped, and the ship was saved. When I saw him," she pointed at Ethan, "I knew it was him. That's why I called him Daddy." Ethan felt a chill down his spine. The child's words were innocent, but in a hall filled with superstition and tradition, they sounded almost prophetic. The king growled, "Nonsense, children imagine things. This is foolishness." The queen, however, studied Ethan carefully. "Perhaps. But the girl is rarely wrong about her feelings." She turned to Ethan, her voice soft but commanding. "Human, you saved our lives, that cannot be denied. But now you carry a greater weight. You must be cautious. The people will not take this lightly." Ethan nodded quickly. "I understand. I never wanted this. I don't want to cause trouble. I just did what I thought was right." The king snorted. "Trouble is exactly what you've caused. If word spreads that my daughter has chosen a human as—" He stopped himself, his face darkening. "It would bring shame upon the crown." Already the nobles whisper. The queen smiled faintly, almost amused by her husband's anger. "Perhaps shame, or perhaps something else. Do you not see how the court looked at him? Some were horrified, yes, but others were curious. The people admire courage, even in an outsider." The king turned away, unwilling to admit that. That evening, Ethan was given chambers inside the palace instead of being sent back to his shuttle. 2 guards stood outside his door at all times. Whether they were there to protect him or to watch him, Ethan couldn't tell. The room itself was beautiful. Walls of carved stone, a balcony overlooking glowing alien gardens, a bed draped in silver cloth. Yet Ethan could not rest. His mind kept replaying the moment the princess had called him daddy. "Why me?" he thought. "Why did she choose me of all people?" Before long there was a knock. The door opened and the princess slipped inside with a mischievous grin. She carried a small stuffed creature, something like a mix between a cat and a bird tucked under her arm. "Daddy," she whispered, running to him. Ethan raised his hands quickly. "Wait. Please don't call me that again. If your father hears—" She pouted. "I don't care what father says, you are daddy, that's final." Ethan sighed, kneeling down so he could look her in the eyes. "Listen, I'm not your father, I'm just someone who helped your ship, that's all." But the girl shook her head stubbornly. "You don't understand. I chose you, that means it's true." Ethan rubbed his face. He had no idea how to argue with a child who believed with all her heart. Finally, he smiled weakly. "Fine. But only when we're alone, all right? Not in front of the king. Promise?" The princess grinned and nodded quickly. "Promise." She sat on the floor beside him, hugging her toy. "Daddy, will you protect me again if I'm in danger?" Her voice was so sincere that Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He remembered the fear in her eyes when she spoke in the hall. She truly believed he was her protector. "I'll do what I can," Ethan said softly. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The princess beamed, as though his words were a sacred vow. The next morning, rumors had already spread across the city. Servants whispered in corridors, merchants gossiped in the markets, and soldiers spoke in hushed voices about the human the princess had called daddy. Some mocked it, some said it was an omen. A few even said it might be destiny. The king, furious, summoned Ethan again to the throne room. This time dozens of nobles were present, their eyes sharp with judgment. The queen sat calmly beside her husband, the princess perched at her side, holding her hand. The king rose. "This cannot continue, the people already speak of it. They laugh at my throne, at my bloodline. This human must prove himself or be cast out forever." Ethan's chest tightened. He had expected something like this, but hearing it aloud was far worse. The queen tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "And how do you suggest he proves himself?" The king's voice was sharp. "Through trial. Let him face the arena. Let him show the people what he is truly worth." Gasps filled the chamber. The arena was not entertainment. It was a place of brutal tests where warriors proved their honor or died trying. The princess leapt to her feet. "No, you can't. He saved us. He doesn't need to prove anything." But the king only crossed his arms. "If he wishes to remain near you, if he wishes to be seen as anything more than a worm, he will accept." Otherwise, he leaves this palace tonight, and you will never see him again." The girl turned desperately to Ethan, her silver eyes shimmering with tears. "Please don't go, please." Ethan's heart twisted. He wanted nothing more than to walk away to escape this mess. He was just a pilot, not a warrior. But then he looked at the princess, at her small, trembling hands clutching his sleeve. She believed in him completely. Slowly, Ethan lifted his head and met the king's fiery gaze. "If trial is what it takes, then I'll face it." The hall erupted in whispers again. Some nobles scoffed, certain the human would die quickly. Others leaned forward, intrigued by his courage. The king's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile forming. "So be it. The trials begin at dawn." The princess clung tighter to Ethan's arm. The queen's expression softened for the first time, almost proud, though she hid it well. Ethan knew he had just stepped into something far bigger than himself. He would have to fight, not for glory, not for honor, but for the trust of a child who had chosen him against all odds. And across the palace, the king began planning challenges meant to break him. The palace stirred with excitement before dawn. Rumors had spread fast across the empire. A human was going to face the royal trials. Crowds gathered near the arena, nobles filled the viewing balconies, and guards tightened their ranks. For most, it was a chance to laugh at the weakness of a human. For others, it was curiosity. What would drive a fragile outsider to stand before the throne's brutal tests? Ethan, however, wasn't laughing. He sat quietly in a stone chamber beneath the arena. His patched flight suit had been replaced with plain armor made for palace guards. It was heavy on his shoulders, too large for his frame, but at least it offered some protection. In his hand he held a simple spear, its tip gleaming faintly in the torchlight. He had never fought in an arena. He had never even held a weapon like this. The door opened, and a familiar small voice broke the silence. "Daddy?" Ethan looked up sharply. The princess slipped inside, her little crown slightly crooked, her silver eyes shimmering with worry. Behind her stood the queen, regal as ever, her gaze steady. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan whispered. "If your father finds out," the queen interrupted calmly. "He already knows. I told him I would speak with you before the trial." The princess ran to Ethan, clutching his arm. "Don't do it, please don't. You don't have to prove anything, not to him, not to anyone." Ethan knelt down, resting the spear beside him. "Listen, I don't want to fight. I don't want to be here, but if I refuse, I'll be cast out and then I'll never see you again." Her eyes filled with tears. "But you could get hurt. You could die." Ethan smiled weakly. "Maybe. But sometimes, doing the right thing means facing fear, even when you don't want to. You called me Daddy. That means I have to try to protect you, even from far bigger things than me." The queen's lips curved into a faint smile. "He is braver than I thought." The princess hugged him tightly. "Then promise you'll come back, promise." Ethan hugged her back gently. "I promise I'll try with everything I have." The guards entered then, bowing to the queen. "It is time." The princess held on to Ethan until the last possible moment before being pulled away by her mother. Her small voice echoed through the chamber. "Come back, Daddy." Ethan closed his eyes. The word no longer embarrassed him. Instead, it gave him strength. The arena gates creaked open. The crowd roared. Ethan stepped into the light, his eyes narrowing against the blazing sun. The floor was a wide circle of sand, stained from countless battles. Above, thousands of spectators filled the stands, cheering, laughing, or shouting insults. At the highest balcony sat the royal family. The king leaned forward, his arms crossed, eyes burning with cruel satisfaction. The queen sat calm and composed, though her eyes flickered briefly toward Ethan. The princess stood at the railing, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. A horn blared. The first trial began. From the far side of the arena, a massive gate opened. Out stomped a creature unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It had 4 thick legs, a body covered in armored scales, and tusks that curved upward like scythes. Its roar shook the ground. The crowd cheered wildly. Ethan's mouth went dry. He had no plan, no training, just a spear and desperation. The beast charged. Sand flew beneath its claws. Ethan scrambled to the side, rolling just in time as the tusks sliced through the air where he had been. He stumbled back to his feet, clutching the spear. His heart hammered, but he forced himself to think. He couldn't fight strength with strength. He had to be clever. The creature charged again. This time, Ethan ran straight toward a tall pillar in the arena's center. At the last moment, he darted around it. The beast slammed into the stone, the impact echoing like thunder. Cracks spread along the pillar. The crowd gasped. Ethan used the distraction. He jabbed his spear into the creature's softer side, right between the scales. The beast roared in pain, twisting violently. Ethan was thrown backward, rolling through the sand. The spear snapped in half, useless now. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some laughing at his struggle. Ethan got back up, bruised and coughing dust. His weapon was gone, but he noticed something. The cracks in the pillar had widened. He looked at the charging beast, then at the weakened stone. Another idea formed. He taunted the creature, waving his broken spear. "Come on, you ugly brute. Over here." The beast roared furious and charged once more. Ethan sprinted toward the cracked pillar, leaping aside at the last possible second. The monster slammed into it with all its strength. The pillar shattered, collapsing into rubble. The stone fell onto the beast, pinning it down with a final roar of pain. The arena shook with dust and debris. Ethan stood panting, his arms trembling. He had survived the first trial. The crowd was stunned. Many had expected him to die instantly. Instead, the human had used wit to overcome a monster twice his size. On the royal balcony, the queen allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The princess clapped wildly, shouting his name, but the king's face darkened further. The horn blared again. The second trial began. This time, 3 armored warriors entered the arena. They carried curved blades and tower shields, their armor gleaming under the sun. Trained soldiers, no creature's wild fury, but discipline and skill. Ethan's stomach sank. He had faced a beast with luck and instinct. But soldiers? He was no fighter. The warriors surrounded him in a triangle. One lunged with a blade. Ethan dodged barely, the weapon grazing his armor. He stumbled back, grabbing a fallen shield from the sand. The fight was brutal. Each time Ethan blocked one attack, another came from behind. He was slashed across his arm, his shield cracked, his legs nearly swept out from under him. The crowd cheered for blood, but Ethan remembered something from old survival training. Never fight your enemy where they are strongest. He didn't need to beat them. He just needed to outlast them. He began moving constantly, forcing the warriors to chase him around the arena. Each time they swung, he blocked just enough, then retreated, keeping them off balance. Slowly, they grew frustrated. Their attacks grew sloppy. Then, when one lifted his blade too high, Ethan slammed his cracked shield into his legs. The warrior fell. Ethan grabbed his sword and rolled away. Now armed, he faced the other 2. The crowd roared again, louder this time. It was not easy. His body ached, his arms were heavy, but piece by piece he wore the warriors down. At last, when all 3 lay defeated in the sand, Ethan stood swaying, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead, but alive. The princess screamed in joy. The queen's eyes gleamed, and the king's face twisted in fury, his pride being shattered trial by trial. The horn sounded once more. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. The human has passed the first 2 trials. Now comes the third and final test. The gate opened slowly, and the ground itself seemed to tremble. From the shadows emerged a towering figure clad in black armor, carrying a massive war hammer, the champion of the arena. The crowd went silent, then erupted into chants. Everyone knew this warrior, undefeated, ruthless, the king's personal enforcer. Ethan stared, his breath caught in his throat. He was battered, wounded, nearly spent. And yet this was the last trial. The king leaned forward, smiling cruelly at last. "Now we see the truth," he muttered. The princess's voice cracked across the arena, full of desperation. "Daddy, You can do it. Ethan's legs trembled. His heart pounded. He gripped the stolen sword tightly. This was it. Win or die. The arena grew silent as the black-armored champion stepped forward. Each footstep was heavy, shaking the sand. His warhammer gleamed in the sunlight, large enough to crush a man in a single strike. Ethan's breath came shallow. His body already ached from the last two trials. His arm throbbed from cuts, his forehead burned from blood, and yet here he was, facing the most feared warrior of the Empire. The crowd chanted the champion's name. To them, this was not a fight. It was an execution. High above, the king leaned, forward on his throne, finally smiling. The queen sat calmly, her gaze sharp and unreadable. The princess, however, gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Daddy," she shouted across the arena. "Don't give up. Please don't give up." Ethan heard her. The sound of her voice cut through the roar of the crowd. It reminded him why he had agreed to this madness in the first place. Not for pride, not for glory, but because a little girl believed in him. The horn blared. The final trial began. The champion wasted no time. With surprising speed for his size, he swung the hammer in a wide arc. Ethan dove aside, rolling across the sand as the weapon smashed down where he had stood. The ground shook. Dust exploded, upward. If he had been even a second slower, he would have been crushed. Ethan scrambled to his feet, gripping the stolen sword tighter. He slashed at the champion's side, but the blade only bounced off the black armor with a loud clang. The warrior didn't even flinch. The crowd laughed. To them, it looked like a child poking at a mountain. The champion swung again. Ethan barely blocked with his sword, but the force sent him flying backward, crashing into the sand. Pain shot through his chest. He gasped, struggling to stand. The princess cried out from the balcony, "Get up, Daddy, please." Ethan coughed, his vision blurry, but he forced himself up. He couldn't let her see him fall. Not yet. The champion advanced slowly, hammer resting on his shoulder. His helmet hid his face, but his body language was full of confidence. This was just another easy kill to him. Ethan's mind raced. His sword was useless. His strength was nothing compared to this warrior. He needed to think differently. Just like with the beast. Just like with the soldiers. He couldn't fight the champion's power. He had to use it against him. The hammer came down again. Ethan dodged, and the weapon struck the sand, leaving a deep crater. The ground shook so violently, Ethan nearly lost his balance. But he noticed something. The hammer was slow to lift again. Heavy. That was his chance. Ethan darted forward, not at the warrior, but at his legs. He swung the sword low, aiming for the gaps between the armored plates. Sparks flew as the blade scraped metal. The champion roared, staggering slightly. It wasn't much, but it was something. The crowd gasped. The queen's lips curved into the faintest smile. The king's face tightened. The champion, enraged, swung the hammer wildly. Ethan ducked, rolled and ran, forcing the warrior to chase him across the arena. The crowd jeered, calling him a coward. But Ethan didn't care. He wasn't here to impress them. He was here to survive. He dodged strike after strike, each one shaking the arena, each one leaving cracks in the stone floor. The champion grew angrier with every miss. His swings grew wilder, his breathing heavier. At last, the warrior raised the hammer high overhead, preparing to crush Ethan once and for all. Ethan waited until the last possible second, then rolled aside. The hammer smashed into the ground, with earth-shattering force. Stone cracked beneath the impact. For a moment, the weapon stuck in the broken ground. Ethan didn't hesitate. He leapt forward, driving his sword into the joint of the warrior's arm, right where the armor was weakest. The champion roared in pain, stumbling back. The arena erupted, in chaos, some cheering, some gasping. Ethan wrenched the sword free, panting heavily. His body shook with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with determination. The champion pulled his hammer free, but his movements were slower now. His injured arm dragged slightly. Ethan had found a weakness. The fight dragged on, strike after strike, dodge after dodge. Ethan used every ounce of cunning, every bit of speed he had left. He targeted the weak points, aiming for joints, avoiding the armor's strongest plates. Slowly, painfully, the giant warrior began to falter. At last, with one final desperate move, Ethan dodged another swing, scrambled up onto the champion's back and drove his sword into the neck joint where the armor ended. The blade pierced deep. The champion let out a final roar before collapsing face first into the sand. Silence fell across the arena. Then, all at once, the crowd erupted into thunderous cheers. Ethan stood swaying, covered in sweat and dust, his chest heaving. He could hardly believe it. He had survived all 3 trials. On the royal balcony, the queen slowly rose to her feet, her eyes locked on Ethan. She clapped once, then again, the sound echoing through the silence. The nobles hesitated, then followed, her lead clapping reluctantly. But the king did not move. His face was twisted with fury, his pride shattered. This was supposed to be the human's death. Instead, the human had become a spectacle of courage. The princess, unable to contain herself, jumped up and down, shouting at the top of her lungs. "He did it. Daddy did it. He's the strongest. He's the best." Her voice rang out across the arena, and thousands heard it. The word spread through the crowd like fire. Daddy. The human was the princess's chosen protector. Ethan's face flushed, but he didn't try to correct her this time. He just raised his sword weakly, too, tired to argue, too tired to care. After the trial, Ethan was carried back to the palace by guards. Instead of chains, they treated him with respect now, almost fear. Servants bowed as he passed. Even those who had mocked him earlier now whispered his name with awe. In his chamber, healers tended to his wounds. The princess burst into the room, ignoring everyone else, and ran straight to him. She threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "I knew you'd come back. I knew it." Ethan hugged her gently, though every muscle in his body ached. "Told you I'd try." The queen entered soon after. Her expression was calm, but there was a flicker of something. Approval, perhaps even pride. "You have done more than survive. Human. You have earned respect in a place where none thought it possible." Ethan shook his head weakly. "I didn't want respect. I just didn't want her to cry." The queen studied him for a long moment. "And that is why you succeeded. You fought not for yourself, but for someone else." From outside, faint chants could already be heard. Citizens repeating the story, repeating the word the princess had shouted. Daddy, protector, human. The king sat alone on his throne, his hands clenched, his pride bleeding. He could not kill the human now, not without turning his people against him. Yet to accept Ethan meant humiliation, and so his fury only grew. Ethan, unaware of the storm building in the king's heart, sat quietly in his chamber. The princess curled up beside him, her small hand gripping his sleeve as though afraid he would vanish. For the first time since arriving, Ethan let himself rest. He had passed the trials. He had kept his promise. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The palace was restless. Outside, the city buzzed with the story of the human who had faced the royal trials and survived. Everywhere people whispered of the moment the princess shouted, "Daddy," in front of thousands. Some laughed as if it were a strange joke. Others spoke with awe, saying perhaps it was fate. The word spread faster than fire in dry fields. Daddy. Protector. Human. Inside the royal halls, the king fumed. His pride had been wounded before the entire empire. He paced across his chamber like a storm, his fists clenched. "This cannot continue," he growled to himself. "The people speak of him as though he were chosen. My daughter clings to him as if he were her blood. I will not allow it." But even he knew he could not simply execute Ethan now. The trials had been public. The people had seen his courage. To kill him afterward would look cowardly. Even some nobles whispered against it. The queen had warned him, "Strike the human down now, and you strike down your own honor." The king's jaw tightened. If he could not crush Ethan with force, then he would try with humiliation. That evening, the royal court was summoned again. Nobles, generals, and advisors filled the great hall. The queen sat calmly on her throne, the princess beside her. Ethan was escorted in by guards, no longer treated as a prisoner, but not free either. He stood in the center of the hall, bruised and bandaged, his head held high. The king rose slowly, his deep voice echoing. This human has survived the trials. For that, he is not to be executed. But let no one mistake survival for worth. He is still an outsider. He is still weak compared to our kind. The crowd murmured, half agreeing, half doubting. The king's eyes narrowed. And yet, my daughter dares to call him by a sacred name. Daddy. His tone dripped with fury. This insult has been repeated across my empire. Today, before all of you, this shame will end. He turned his glare to Ethan. Human, kneel before me. Deny her words. Deny the name she has given you. Say that you are nothing to her. Say that you are not and never will be what she calls you. The hall fell silent. Everyone waited. The princess gasped, clutching Ethan's sleeve. No! Don't listen to him, please don't! Ethan's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of the king's command pressing down on him. If he denied the child, he might win the king's favor and save himself trouble. But he looked into the princess's eyes. Silver, shining, filled with trust. She had believed in him when no one else did. She had given him a name not out of politics or tradition, but from her heart. Slowly, Ethan shook his head. No, he said softly, his voice carrying across the hall. I won't deny her. She called me daddy because she felt I protected her. She chose me, and I won't throw that away just to please your pride. Gasps rippled through the court. Nobles leaned forward, shocked at his defiance. The king's face turned crimson with rage. You dare defy me in my own hall. The princess stepped forward, her small frame trembling but her voice steady. He is daddy. You can't change that, you can't make me stop. The queen rose then, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. Perhaps it is not defiance, perhaps it is truth. The people already whisper. They already see him as something more than a human. If even a child, untouched by politics, speaks from her heart, should we not listen? The king rounded on her, his voice thunderous. You side with him? I side with reason, the queen replied firmly. You placed him in the trials to break him. Instead, he stood before beasts, warriors, and your champion. And still he lives. And now our daughter, pure of heart, calls him protector. Would you deny the truth that stands before your eyes? The hall erupted into whispers again. Some nobles nodded in agreement. Others looked away, afraid. The king's fury reached its peak. His whole body shook, his pride crushed on every side. And then came the final blow. The princess ran into Ethan's arms, clinging to him in front of everyone. She looked up at him, her voice clear and strong. Daddy, don't let them take you away from me. The word echoed in the silent hall, louder than any horn or drum. Ethan knelt, holding her gently. He didn't argue, didn't correct her. He simply said, I'll always protect you. The queen's lips curved in a quiet smile. The nobles gasped, some covering their mouths. And the king's face twisted into a look of pure shock and humiliation. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, the mighty ruler of the Varian Empire was speechless before his court. That expression, the king's face as his daughter called a human daddy, and the human accepted it, burned itself into the memory of every person in that hall. In the days that followed, the story spread across the empire. The human who survived the trials, the princess who chose him, the king who could not stop it. Common folk began whispering a new title, protector of the princess. Some even believed it was destiny, that the stars themselves had chosen this bond. The king tried to silence the talk, but the more he fought it, the louder it grew. Even generals who had once mocked Ethan began to respect him. The queen continued to watch with calm eyes, seeing something her husband refused to admit. As for Ethan, he remained simple in his heart. He didn't seek titles or power. He only kept his promise to the little girl who had called him Daddy. He walked the palace halls quietly, always keeping an eye out for her, always ready to shield her if danger ever came again. And though he never said it aloud, deep inside, he had begun to accept the truth. In a strange world in the heart of an alien empire, he had found something he never expected.